The Worthington estate sprawled across 12 acres of Connecticut's most expensive real estate, and every blade of grass seemed to whisper about old money and older grudges. I stood near the buffet table, a crystal glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching 63 members of my husband's family mingle beneath white tents that probably cost more than my first car. Marcus had promised this year would be different. His hand found the small of my back as he leaned in to kiss my temple. "I'll get us some of those crab cakes you like," he said, and I watched him disappear into the crowd, leaving me alone near the champagne fountain. That was my first mistake. Never let yourself become isolated in hostile territory. I felt Priscilla before I saw her. The air changed, charged with the particular electricity that precedes an ambush. She materialized at my side with two of her cousins flanking her, Bradley trailing behind like an eager shadow. Her silk dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her smile held all the warmth of a January deployment in the North Atlantic. "Vivian," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for the nearby clusters of relatives to hear. "I was just telling Bradley about your fascinating military career." She turned to her cousin with theatrical concern. "She claims she served in the Navy. Can you imagine?" I took a measured sip of my water. "I don't claim anything, Priscilla. I served. Past and present tense, actually." Her laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, sweetheart, that's adorable." She stepped closer, and I noticed how the surrounding conversations quieted, how heads turned in our direction. This was a performance, and she had been rehearsing. "You know, I have friends at the Pentagon, real military families, and they find it absolutely hilarious that you expect us to believe you were some kind of sailor." "Navy SEAL," I corrected quietly. "There's a difference." The crowd murmured. Someone actually snorted. Priscilla's eyes widened with mock astonishment. "A Navy SEAL? Oh, this just gets better." She turned to address the growing audience, gesturing at me like I was an exhibit. "Ladies and gentlemen, my brother's wife wants us to believe she's a Navy SEAL. Look at her. Does this look like someone who survived military training?" I stood perfectly still. My heart rate remained steady, 62 beats per minute, the same rhythm it held during combat operations. I had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than any defense. "Real sailors don't look like you," Priscilla continued, emboldened by my lack of response. "You're just a desperate liar trying to impress our family, trying to seem interesting because you came from nothing and you have nothing to offer my brother except these ridiculous stories." Margaret Worthington appeared at the edge of the circle, champagne flute in hand. My mother-in-law said nothing. She simply watched, took a delicate sip, and offered me nothing but the slight raise of one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "You know what I think?" Priscilla pressed closer, her perfume cloying. "I think this is stolen valor. I think you're a fraud who never stepped foot on a ship, who probably got seasick on a ferry once and decided that made you military material." The words "stolen valor" rippled through the crowd. I saw phones appear in hands. This was being recorded. Marcus pushed through the circle, his face flushed with anger. "Priscilla, that's enough. You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, Marcus." His sister placed a manicured hand on his chest, stopping him. "You're so blind when it comes to her. She's been lying to you since the day you met. There's no record of her service anywhere public. Don't you find that convenient? She probably worked at some Navy administrative office and built this whole fantasy around it." "My service record is classified," I said evenly. "That's not the same as non-existent." "Classified?" Priscilla threw her head back and laughed. "Did you hear that? Classified, how absolutely convenient. Every liar's favorite excuse." Charles Worthington SR joined his wife at the circle's edge. His expression held that particular blend of condescension and disappointment I had come to know so well. The patriarch said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes about which side he had chosen. Bradley finally stepped forward, smirking. "You know, Priscilla, I read that stolen valor is actually a federal offense. Maybe we should report her." The crowd laughed. 63 people, and not one voice rose in my defense except my husband's, and even he was being physically blocked by his own sister. I set my water glass down on the buffet table. My movements were precise, controlled. Priscilla watched me with triumphant satisfaction, clearly interpreting my silence as surrender. The truth doesn't need defenders when it has witnesses, and soon they would all see. My phone vibrated in my clutch. I didn't reach for it yet. Instead, I met Priscilla's gaze and held it with the same steady focus I had used to stare down hostile combatants in territories whose names would never appear in any newspaper. "I don't owe you proof of anything, Priscilla," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent garden. "But life has a way of providing it anyway." She blinked, momentarily uncertain. Then her smug smile returned. She had no idea what was coming. I excused myself from the circle of spectators, feeling their eyes follow me as I walked toward the rose garden at the edge of the property. Marcus tried to follow, but I shook my head slightly. I needed a moment alone with my memories, with the weight of everything that had led to this particular afternoon. The thing about the Worthingtons was that they had never given me a fair chance, not from the very beginning. I met Marcus 3 years ago at a naval charity gala in Washington. I was in civilian clothes, a simple black dress I had bought on sale because I never had occasion to wear anything fancy. My world consisted of tactical gear, combat boots, and the occasional dress uniform for ceremonies. The gala was a favor to my commanding officer, who needed officers to represent the SEAL community at the fundraiser. Marcus approached me near the silent auction table. He was handsome in that effortless old-money way, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We talked for 2 hours about everything except my job. When he asked what I did, I said simply, "I work for the Navy." He assumed I meant something administrative, and I let him believe it. I was tired of the reactions, the disbelief, the men who either fetishized my service or refused to accept its reality. Our first real date was at a quiet Italian restaurant in Georgetown. By our 3rd date, I knew I was falling for him. By our 6th, I told him the truth. "I'm a Navy SEAL," I said over pasta. "I lead a team. Most of what I do is classified, which means I can't talk about it, ever, not even with you." Marcus had set down his fork and stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I knew you were extraordinary, I just didn't know how much." He never asked for proof. He never demanded stories or details. He accepted me completely, and that acceptance felt like coming home after a long deployment. Meeting his family was a different experience entirely. The first dinner at the Worthington estate happened 6 months into our relationship. Margaret greeted me at the door with a handshake so brief it barely qualified as contact. Charles S.R. looked me up and down and asked what my father did for a living. When I told him my father was a mechanic in San Antonio and my mother was a schoolteacher, his interest in me evaporated entirely. Priscilla cornered me in the kitchen that night. She was fetching more wine, and I had offered to help carry glasses. "So," she said, leaning against the marble counter, "Marcus tells me you're in the military. How cute, like a little G.I. Jane situation." "Something like that," I replied. "What do you actually do? Answer phones? File paperwork?" She laughed at her own joke. "I'm sure it's very important work. Someone has to keep the office running while the real soldiers are out there." I could have corrected her. I could have told her about the 6 months I spent training to survive conditions that would break most human beings. I could have described the moment I earned my trident, becoming one of the few women in history to complete basic underwater demolition SEAL training. I could have mentioned the deployments, the missions, the nights I spent in hostile territory with nothing but my team and my training between me and death. Instead, I just smiled and carried the wine glasses to the dining room. That was my pattern with the Worthingtons. Smile. Stay silent. Protect the classified nature of my work while they interpreted my discretion as evidence that I had nothing real to hide. The wedding was the worst of it. Marcus and I married 18 months after we met, in a ceremony at the Naval Academy Chapel. My side of the aisle was filled with fellow SEALs, naval officers, and my small but fierce family from Texas. The Worthingtons occupied their side like they were attending a funeral, their faces pinched with disapproval. Margaret personally handled the seating chart. My parents, who had driven 18 hours from San Antonio, were placed in the back row. My commanding officer, a rear admiral who had specifically requested to attend, was seated behind a pillar. Meanwhile, Worthington family friends I had never met occupied the front rows as if they were the guests of honor. At the reception, Charles S.R. made a toast that mentioned Marcus's accomplishments extensively and referred to me only as Marcus's new bride. Not by name, not with any acknowledgement of my own achievements, just the bride. Priscilla spent the entire evening making comments just loud enough for me to hear. "I give it 2 years," she said to Bradley. "She's clearly in it for the money. Once she realizes Marcus actually expects her to contribute something to this family, she'll be gone." Contribute something. As if the 8 years I had spent serving my country, the blood I had shed, the teammates I had lost, the operations I had led in the darkest corners of the world amounted to nothing in their ledger of human worth. I remember standing on the balcony of the reception hall that night, still in my wedding dress, watching the stars. Marcus found me there, concern etched on his face. "I'm sorry about my family," he said. "They're not good with outsiders." "Outsiders," I repeated. "Is that what I am?" "To them, not to me." He pulled me close. "Never to me." I loved Marcus for defending me, for seeing me, for believing in me without question. But I also recognized the impossible position he occupied, torn between the family who raised him and the woman he had chosen. I never asked him to take sides, and perhaps that was my mistake. Perhaps my silence enabled their cruelty. The memories kept coming as I stood in the rose garden, the sounds of the reunion fading behind me. I thought about the deployment that followed our wedding, 6 weeks in a location I still cannot name, leading my team through an operation that would never make headlines. I thought about coming home to find Marcus waiting at the airport, and then enduring a family dinner 2 days later, where Priscilla asked if my little work trip had been relaxing. I thought about the locked box in our closet, the one that held my commendations and medals. The Navy Cross was in there, awarded in a private ceremony that Marcus had attended. He had cried when the Secretary of Defense pinned it to my uniform. He had held my hand and told me he had never been prouder of anyone in his entire life. I never showed those medals to his family. They had never asked to see them, never expressed genuine curiosity about my service. Margaret once raised an eyebrow when she noticed calluses on my hands. "Manual labor?" she asked, as if the concept personally offended her. I could have explained that those calluses came from years of weapons training, from rope climbs and obstacle courses and hauling equipment through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. I could have shown her the scars on my shoulder from a mission in the Pacific, or the faded marks on my wrists from a training accident that nearly ended my career. Instead, I smiled, something like that. The pattern of mistreatment had become so normalized that I barely registered it anymore, being excluded from family financial discussions because I wouldn't understand. Comments about Marcus, marrying down, that were always delivered just within earshot. The way Margaret would look at my clothes, my hair, my modest jewelry, and find all of it wanting. Once at a holiday dinner, Charles S.R. had held court about military policy. "Women don't belong in combat," he declared, gesturing with his whiskey glass. "It's just biology. They're not built for it. The military is lowering standards to make politicians happy, and it's going to get people killed." I sat across the table, my hands folded in my lap, and said nothing. Marcus squeezed my knee under the table, a silent apology. Charles S.R. had no idea that the woman sitting at his table had completed training that 90% of male candidates failed. He had no idea that I had led men through firefights, that I had carried wounded teammates to extraction points, that I had made life-and-death decisions under conditions he could not imagine in his worst nightmares. And I never told him, because the truth was classified, because defending myself felt like begging for approval I should not have to earn, because some part of me still hoped that one day they would see me for who I was without needing to know my rank or my medals or my service record. That hope had finally died today, crushed under the weight of Priscilla's public accusations and her family's complicit silence. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The text message waited on the screen, and as I read it again, something shifted in my chest. The warrior and the wife had been two separate people for too long. It was time for them to meet. The text was from Admiral James Richardson, my former commanding officer, and one of the few people who knew the full scope of what I had done for my country. The secretary approved declassification. Your mission footage goes public tomorrow. Thought you should know. Call me. I stared at those words until they blurred. Operation Silent Tide. The mission that had earned me the Navy Cross. 12 American hostages extracted from enemy territory. A mission so dangerous that command had given us only a 30% chance of survival. My team and I had beaten those odds, brought everyone home, and then watched our story disappear into the void of national security. Now it was coming to light. Tomorrow, the world would know. But tomorrow felt like a lifetime away. Behind me, I could still hear the murmur of the reunion, could still feel the weight of those eyes that had watched me be called a fraud. Marcus was probably searching for me, trying to pick up the pieces of a situation his family had shattered. My thumb hovered over Admiral Richardson's number. The old Vivian would have put the phone away and waited for tomorrow's news to speak for her. She would have maintained her separation between worlds, protecting the classified nature of her service even at the cost of her dignity. But the old Vivian had just watched her husband's face crumble as his family laughed at his wife. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the helpless anger of a man caught between impossible loyalties. Marcus had defended me every time, stood by me through every slight, and I had let him fight alone. I pressed the call button. Admiral Richardson answered on the second ring. "Viper, I was hoping you'd call." The sound of my call sign grounded me instantly. "Sir, I just got your message. The footage is being released to major news networks at 600 tomorrow. Pentagon press conference at 800. They want you there for full recognition. You've earned it, Commander." I closed my eyes. "Admiral, I have a situation here." I told him, not everything, but enough. The family reunion, the public accusation, the word fraud being thrown around, the way my husband had been silenced by his own sister while his wife's honor was dragged through the mud. Admiral Richardson was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried steel. "Where are you right now?" I gave him the address. "I'm in New York for a conference. That's less than 2 hours away. I can have a team there by 1900. "Sir, that's not necessary. Tomorrow will." "Commander Reyes," his voice sharpened. "One of my finest officers is being publicly accused of stolen valor while I'm sitting in a hotel room 2 hours away. You think I'm going to let that stand?" I felt something crack inside me. The wall I had built between my two lives was crumbling. "You led Operation Silent Tide," he continued. "You brought 12 Americans home when everyone said it couldn't be done. You have a Navy Cross because you ran into gunfire to save your team. And some trust fund princess is calling you a liar in front of her champagne-sipping relatives." I couldn't help it. I laughed, a small sound broken but real. "I'm bringing the declassified footage," Admiral Richardson said. "I'm bringing your service record, and I'm bringing 2 of your former teammates who happen to be nearby. We're going to settle this tonight, Commander, if you'll allow it." The decision crystallized. For years, I had protected the Worthingtons from the truth of who I was. I had hidden my achievements, made myself small enough to fit their narrow understanding. I had done it for Marcus, for peace, hoping acceptance would come. But acceptance should not require you to erase yourself. "What time should I expect you?" I asked. 1900 hours. Have them set up somewhere we can display video. And Commander, it's going to be all right. The truth has a way of handling these situations. I ended the call and stood in the rose garden, feeling the weight of the moment. In less than 3 hours, Admiral Richardson would arrive with footage of me leading a combat operation. Every whispered doubt, every condescending comment would be answered. Part of me still hesitated. There was something terrifying about this exposure, about stripping away the secrecy that had defined my career. But then I thought about Marcus, about his face when Priscilla blocked him from defending me, about all the times he had believed in me without proof. He deserved to see his faith validated. I texted him, "Can you meet me by the fountain? I need to tell you something." His response was immediate. "On my way. Are you okay?" I smiled at my phone. Even now, his first concern was my well-being. "I will be. Things are about to change." Marcus appeared moments later, his face tight with worry. "Vivian, I am so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into Priscilla." "Marcus," I took his hands, "listen to me." He fell silent. "Admiral Richardson is coming here tonight. He's bringing declassified footage from Operation Silent Tide." I watched his eyes widen. He knew that name. "By tonight, your entire family will know exactly what I've been doing for the past 8 years." Marcus exhaled slowly. "The mission, the one that—" "Yes, the secretary approved its release. It was supposed to go public tomorrow, but the Admiral is bringing it here instead." Marcus pulled me into his arms. I felt his heart pounding. "You don't have to do this, not for them. They don't deserve." "I'm not doing it for them," I said quietly. "I'm doing it for you, and for me. I'm tired of being two different people, Marcus. I'm tired of hiding myself because your family can't handle the truth." He pulled back, tears forming in his eyes. "I love you, every version of you. The wife who makes coffee in the morning and the commander who does things I can't imagine." "I know," I touched his face, "but now everyone else will too." We walked back toward the party together, my hand clasped firmly in Marcus's. The reunion continued in full swing, champagne flowing, laughter echoing across the manicured lawns. Priscilla had returned to holding court near the main tent, no doubt regaling her admirers with the story of how she had exposed her brother's fraudulent wife. I felt the shift in my own posture as we approached. My spine straightened, my shoulders squared. 8 years of military training reasserted itself in ways I usually suppressed around the Worthingtons. Marcus noticed immediately, glancing at me with something between wonder and recognition. "You look different," he murmured. "I feel different," I replied. "The waiting is almost over." My phone buzzed in my clutch. I excused myself from Marcus's side and stepped away to check the message. It was from Admiral Richardson again. "ETA 1845. Bringing Chief Petty Officer Torres and Lieutenant Commander Nakamura. They volunteered the moment they heard. Your team has your back, Viper. Always." Torres and Nakamura, two of my most trusted operators from Operation Silent Tide. Torres had been my breacher, the one who got us through locked doors and reinforced barriers. Nakamura had been my communications specialist, the voice in my ear guiding us through hostile territory. These were the men who had followed me into hell and walked out the other side. These were the men who knew exactly what I was capable of because they had witnessed it firsthand. The knowledge that they were coming, that they had volunteered without hesitation, settled something deep in my chest. In the world I had built with the SEALs, loyalty was not conditional on wealth or status. It was earned through shared sacrifice, through proving yourself under pressure. These men would walk through fire for me, and I for them. That kind of bond was something the Worthingtons could never understand. I typed back a simple acknowledgement and returned to Marcus. He was watching Priscilla from across the lawn, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. "She's telling everyone about her great triumph," he said bitterly. "The way she exposed the fraud, half my cousins are laughing about it." "Let them laugh," I said calmly. "They won't be laughing long." My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number with a government prefix. I answered quietly. "Commander Reyes, this is Captain Morrison from the Department of Defense Public Affairs Office. Admiral Richardson informed us of the situation. We're coordinating with local authorities to ensure smooth access to the venue. Should we expect any resistance at the gate?" I almost laughed at the formality of it all. "The estate has private security," I told him. "They may be surprised by official vehicles." "We'll handle it, ma'am. The Admiral wants you to know that we're bringing the full presentation setup. Large screen, professional display." He said, and I quote, "If we're going to do this, we're doing it right." "Thank you, Captain." I ended the call and felt the first stirrings of anticipation replacing my earlier dread. This was really happening. In less than 2 hours, the world I had kept hidden would collide with the world that had rejected me. Marcus touched my arm. Everything okay? DOD is coordinating with local authorities, I said. They're treating this like an official event. His eyebrows rose. That seems significant. Admiral Richardson doesn't do things halfway. We drifted through the party, maintaining appearances, while my mind raced with logistics and possibilities. I noticed things I normally overlooked. The layout of the estate, the sight lines from the main gathering area, the electrical access points where a presentation screen might be set up. Old habits, tactical thinking. I couldn't turn it off even if I wanted to. Priscilla spotted us near the dessert table and made her way over, her champagne glass held like a scepter. Her smile was predatory, triumphant. "There you are," she said sweetly. "I was worried you'd run off. Wouldn't want anyone to think you were hiding from your own lies." "I'm not hiding, Priscilla," I said evenly. "I'm waiting." Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary uncertainty. "Waiting for what? A fake medal ceremony? Perhaps you ordered a costume online." "You'll see." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, this is too good. She's still trying to maintain the charade." She turned to call over her shoulder. "Bradley, come here, you have to hear this. The fraud says she's waiting for something." Bradley materialized with his perpetual smirk. "What, did you order a sailor costume on Amazon Prime? 2-day delivery." The cousins gathered around us laughed. I felt Marcus tense beside me, ready to explode, and I placed a calming hand on his arm. "Marcus, darling," Priscilla's voice dripped with false concern. "You really should consider an annulment before this embarrassment goes any further. Father knows an excellent attorney." "Priscilla," Marcus's voice was ice, "you have no idea what you've done." "What I've done is protect this family from a con artist," she shot back. "Someone had to. You're too blinded by whatever spell she's cast on you to see the truth." I said nothing. I simply checked my watch. Less than 90 minutes now. The next hour passed in a strange suspension of time. I moved through the party like a ghost, present but disconnected. Relatives whispered as I passed. Some laughed openly. Others wore expressions of pity that were almost worse than the mockery. "Poor Marcus," their faces said, "married a pathological liar and doesn't even know it." At 18:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Richardson. 15 minutes out. Where should we set up?" I consulted briefly with Marcus, who suggested the main terrace overlooking the garden. It was where the family gathered for announcements and toasts, visible from virtually every point on the grounds. "I'll arrange for a screen," Marcus said. "The estate has AV equipment for events. My father won't like it, but right now I don't particularly care what my father likes." He disappeared to make the arrangements, and I found myself standing alone at the edge of the terrace, watching the sun begin its descent toward the Connecticut hills. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, a beautiful backdrop for what was about to unfold. I heard the vehicles before I saw them, the distinctive rumble of large engines, the sound of official motorcade. My training allowed me to identify them immediately. Armored SUVs, government issue. At least 3 of them, based on the engine sounds. Other guests began to notice too. Heads turned toward the long driveway. Conversations faltered. "What on earth?" I heard Margaret say from somewhere behind me. The estate's security team appeared at the main gate, looking confused and uncertain. I watched one of them speak into a radio, his body language shifting from authoritative to deferential as the credentials of the approaching vehicles were verified. "Those are government plates," someone said. "Federal government." "Is this some kind of inspection?" Another voice asked nervously. I allowed myself a small smile. The truth doesn't need defenders when it has witnesses, and our witnesses had just arrived. Marcus reappeared at my side, slightly breathless. "The screen is being set up. My father is furious, demanding to know what's happening. I told him to wait and see." "Good." "Vivian," he took my hand, his eyes bright with emotion. "Are you ready for this?" I looked at him, this man who had loved me without conditions, who had defended me without proof, who had stood by me through every humiliation his family had inflicted. In a few minutes, he would see exactly who he had married. Not the quiet wife who smiled through insults, but the commander who had led warriors into battle. "I've been ready for a long time," I said. "I just didn't know it." The black SUVs rolled up the circular driveway and stopped in perfect formation in front of the main entrance. Doors opened with military precision. I saw Torres first, his familiar broad shoulders and steady gaze. Then Nakamura, his expression calm and focused. They were in their dress uniforms, every metal gleaming. And then Admiral James Richardson stepped out of the lead vehicle. 3 stars glinted on his shoulders. His dress whites were immaculate, his bearing that of a man who had commanded fleets and shaped naval strategy for decades. Behind him, a DoD communications officer carried a secure laptop and what looked like a portable projection unit. The reunion had fallen completely silent. 63 Worthingtons stood frozen, champagne glasses suspended, conversations abandoned. Every eye was fixed on the military personnel now walking toward the main terrace. Priscilla's voice cut through the silence, high and uncertain. "What is this? Who are these people?" No one answered her. No one could look away from the 3-star admiral ascending the terrace steps, his officers flanking him with the precision of a color guard. Margaret clutched Charles S.R.'s arm. "Charles, what is happening? Did you arrange something?" "No," Charles said slowly, his face pale. "I did not." The admiral stopped at the top of the steps and surveyed the gathered crowd. His gaze swept across confused faces, past shocked expressions, until it landed on me. And then, in a voice that carried across the entire estate, he called out the words that would change everything. "Commander Reyes, good evening, ma'am." I stepped forward, my spine straight, my bearing every inch the officer I was. "Admiral Richardson, thank you for coming." Behind me, I heard Priscilla's champagne glass shatter on the terrace stones. She hadn't dropped it. She had simply stopped holding it, her fingers gone slack with shock. Marcus squeezed my hand one final time before I released it and walked forward to meet my commanding officer. The truth didn't need defenders anymore. It had witnesses. Admiral Richardson extended his hand, and I shook it with the firm grip that had been drilled into me since my first day at Annapolis. His eyes held warmth beneath their official composure, and I saw the corners of his mouth twitch in what might have been a suppressed smile. "It's good to see you, Viper," he said quietly, using my call sign for only me to hear. Then, louder, for the benefit of the stunned crowd. "Commander Reyes, I apologize for the unexpected visit. When I heard about the circumstances here tonight, I felt it was appropriate to deliver some news in person rather than waiting for tomorrow's press release." Torres and Nakamura had positioned themselves on either side of the terrace, their posture relaxed but watchful. I recognized that stance. It was the same way they held themselves before an operation, alert to every potential threat. Old habits died hard for all of us. Admiral Charles Worthington S.R. stepped forward, attempting to reclaim some authority in his own home. His voice carried the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "I'm afraid I don't understand what's happening here. This is a private family gathering." Admiral Richardson turned to face him, and I watched Charles S.R. instinctively straighten under that commanding gaze. The admiral had a way of making everyone feel like they were suddenly enlisted. "Mr. Worthington, I presume, my apologies for the intrusion." His tone was polite but carried no actual apology. "I'm Vice Admiral James Richardson, United States Navy. I'm here on a matter of some importance regarding your daughter-in-law." "Regarding Vivian," Margaret's voice was sharp with confusion. "What could the Navy possibly want with her?" The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He had dealt with dismissive civilians before, but never once quite so personally invested in belittling one of his officers. "Perhaps we should proceed with the presentation," he said calmly. "I believe some clarification is in order." The DoD communications officer had already begun setting up the portable screen near the terrace's stone balustrade. Within minutes, A large display was positioned where everyone on the lawn could see it clearly. The efficiency of the setup spoke to careful planning, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the Admiral's thoroughness. "If everyone would please give their attention," Admiral Richardson addressed the crowd. His voice didn't need amplification. 3 decades of command had given him a projection that could carry across a flight deck in a storm. "What I'm about to show you was classified until approximately 72 hours ago. It has been cleared for public release by the Secretary of Defense and will be broadcast on major news networks tomorrow morning. However, given certain accusations that were made here today, I felt it appropriate to provide an advance screening." His gaze found Priscilla in the crowd. She had gone pale, her earlier bravado evaporating under the weight of official attention. "Accusations of stolen valor," the Admiral continued, his voice hardening slightly, "are serious matters. They impugn not only the individual accused but the integrity of our armed forces. I take such accusations very personally when they're leveled against officers under my command." The screen flickered to life, and suddenly I was looking at myself from 2 years ago. The footage was grainy, shot from a helmet camera in low-light conditions, but it was unmistakably me. I was in full tactical gear, my face half hidden by night vision equipment, but my voice was clear as I issued commands to the team moving through hostile territory. "Operation Silent Tide commenced at 300 local time in a location I cannot specify even now," Admiral Richardson narrated. 12 American citizens were being held by hostile forces. Traditional diplomatic channels had failed. The decision was made to send in a SEAL team for extraction. On screen, I watched my past self move through the darkness, hand signals guiding my team through a compound bristling with armed guards. The camera captured brief flashes of combat, muzzle flashes in the darkness, the controlled chaos of a firefight executed with lethal precision. The operation was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Vivian Reyes, call sign Viper, the Admiral continued. She personally led the breach team that secured the hostages. The footage shifted to an interior shot, a room filled with terrified civilians huddled against the wall. My voice, steady despite the chaos, telling them, "We're Americans, we're here to take you home, stay close to me." I heard gasps from the crowd. Someone was crying. I didn't look to see who. The next sequence showed the extraction, a running battle through narrow corridors, my team covering the hostages as we moved toward the exfiltration point. At one moment, the camera captured me shoving a civilian to the ground just before bullets tore through the space where they had been standing. During the extraction, Admiral Richardson's voice had taken on a formal quality, the tone used for medal citations. Commander Reyes exposed herself to enemy fire to protect the hostages. When a member of her team was wounded, she personally carried him 300 meters to the extraction point while maintaining suppressive fire. The footage showed exactly that. Me, struggling under the weight of a wounded SEAL, my weapon still blazing in my free hand, refusing to leave anyone behind. Torres, standing at the edge of the terrace, caught my eye and nodded. He was the one I had carried. His leg had taken a round that would have been fatal if I hadn't gotten him to the medic in time. All 12 hostages were recovered alive, the Admiral concluded. All SEAL team members survived, though several sustained injuries. The operation was deemed a complete success and was classified at the highest levels for national security reasons. The footage changed again. Now it showed a formal ceremony, the kind I had only seen in photographs from other people's careers. I was in my dress whites, standing at attention in a wood-paneled room I recognized as the Secretary of Defense's office. "For extraordinary heroism in combat," a voice intoned on the recording. "Risking her own life to save 12 American citizens and demonstrating leadership of the highest caliber under the most extreme conditions, the Secretary of Defense hereby awards Lieutenant Commander Vivian Reyes the Navy Cross." The camera captured the Secretary himself pinning the medal to my uniform. It captured the tears I had tried to hide, the trembling salute I had managed, the pride in Admiral Richardson's face as he stood witness to the ceremony. Marcus made a sound beside me, something between a sob and a laugh. I I reached for his hand without looking, and his fingers closed around mine like he was drowning. "The Navy Cross," Admiral Richardson addressed the silent crowd, "is the second highest decoration that can be awarded to a member of the United States Navy. It is given only for extraordinary heroism in combat. In the Navy's history, fewer than 700 have been awarded. Commander Reyes is one of only a handful of women to ever receive this honor." The screen went dark. The Connecticut evening settled around us, broken only by the distant sound of birds and the shocked breathing of 63 people who had just watched their assumptions shatter. Admiral Richardson reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. "I have here Commander Reyes's complete service record, declassified as of this week. 8 years of service, multiple deployments, numerous commendations. She completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training, one of the most grueling military training programs in the world, with a success rate of approximately 10%. She was one of the first women to earn the SEAL Trident." He opened the folder and began to read. "Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat. Bronze Star with valor for actions in the Pacific Theater. Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. Combat Action Ribbon. 2 deployments to locations I still cannot name. Command of a SEAL team with a perfect mission success rate under her leadership." The Admiral closed the folder and looked directly at Priscilla, who seemed to have shrunk several inches since the presentation began. "This," he said quietly, "is the woman you called a fraud. This is the woman whose service you dismissed as fantasy. This is the woman you accused of stolen valor in front of her family and yours." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady at 62 beats per minute despite everything. Combat breathing, some things you never unlearn. "I want to be clear about something," Admiral Richardson continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the estate. "Commander Reyes never asked me to come here tonight. She never sought to prove herself to any of you. She maintained the classified nature of her service with absolute integrity, even when that silence cost her your respect and your acceptance. She did this because she is a professional, because she understands that some things are more important than personal vindication." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I came here tonight because I could not allow a decorated combat veteran, one of the finest officers I have ever had the privilege to command, to be publicly accused of stolen valor without response. I came here because the Navy takes care of its own. And I came here because, frankly, I wanted to see the looks on your faces." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "I'm an old man with simple pleasures." Tors actually chuckled at that. The sound broke something in the frozen tableau, and suddenly people were moving, breathing, reacting. Marcus pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I knew," he whispered against my hair. "I always knew you were extraordinary, but this, Vivian, I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," I said quietly. "That was the point." I felt other eyes on me, the weight of 63 gazes recalibrating everything they thought they knew. But I didn't look at them. Not yet. For this moment, I allowed myself to simply be held by my husband, to feel the relief of finally being seen. Admiral Richardson approached us, his expression softening into something almost fatherly. "Commander, you should know that the Pentagon has received significant interest in your story. Several networks want interviews. There's talk of a book deal, a documentary. You're about to become very famous." I shook my head slightly. "I didn't do any of it for fame, sir." "I know, that's what makes you worthy of it." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Take some time, let this sink in, but know that you have options now. Whatever you decide, the Navy will support you." I nodded, unable to find words. Behind us, I heard Priscilla's voice, thin and trembling. I couldn't have known. I didn't turn to look at her. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Some words once spoken cannot be unsaid. The truth had been witnessed. That was enough for now. I finally released Marcus and turned to face the crowd. The transformation in their expressions was almost comical. Where there had been mockery, now there was awe. Where there had been dismissal, now there was something approaching reverence. The shift should have felt satisfying, but instead it left a bitter taste in my mouth. They had needed proof. They had needed a 3-star admiral and declassified footage, and a Navy Cross citation to treat me as a human being worthy of basic respect. My word had meant nothing. My husband's defense had meant nothing. Only when confronted with irrefutable evidence had they finally chosen to see me. Priscilla stepped forward, her movements uncertain in a way I had never seen from her before. The confident woman who had cornered me at the buffet, who had thrown accusations like grenades, had vanished. In her place stood someone smaller, diminished by the weight of her own cruelty. "Vivian," she started, her voice cracking. I couldn't have known. You never said anything. You never showed us any proof. How was I supposed to?" "You weren't supposed to need proof, Priscilla." My voice was calm, steady, the same tone I used to brief my team before operations. "You were supposed to extend me the basic courtesy of believing your brother's wife. You were supposed to consider that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth." She flinched as if I had struck her. "But you never talked about it. You never shared any details. You were so secretive." "Because it was classified," I said simply. "Because my silence was protecting operations and lives. Because I took an oath that meant something to me, even when that oath cost me your acceptance." Torres and Nakamura had moved closer, not threateningly, but with the quiet solidarity of teammates. Their presence at my back felt like armor. "You called me a fraud," I continued, my voice carrying across the silent terrace. "You accused me of stolen valor in front of your entire family. Do you understand what that accusation means? Stolen valor is a federal offense. It's a slap in the face to every man and woman who has served. You threw those words around like they were nothing, like they were just another weapon in your arsenal of insults." Priscilla's eyes were filling with tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." "You meant every word." I cut her off gently but firmly. "You meant to humiliate me. You meant to expose what you believed was a lie. The only thing you didn't anticipate was being wrong." She tried to approach me, perhaps seeking some physical form of reconciliation, but Torres shifted slightly, blocking her path. She stopped, looking at the broad-shouldered SEAL with something approaching fear. "It's all right, Chief," I said. "She's not a threat." Torres stepped aside, but his eyes remained watchful. In his world, in my world, threats came in all forms. A woman with a sharp tongue could do more damage than a hostile combatant if you let your guard down. "Commander Reyes," Margaret Worthington's voice cut through the tension. She had released her husband's arm and stepped forward, her champagne long since abandoned. Her face was arranged in an expression of careful diplomacy, the kind she probably used at charity galas when navigating social minefields. "We had no idea, truly, if you had simply told us." "Would you have believed me?" I asked directly. Margaret hesitated, and her hesitation was answer enough. "That's what I thought." I felt no anger, only a tired resignation. "You asked me once if I could really afford a nice dress, Margaret. You seated my parents in the back row at my own wedding. You've spent 3 years making it clear that I was beneath your family, beneath your notice, beneath your respect. And now you want me to accept that a simple explanation would have changed everything." She had the grace to look ashamed, though I suspected it was more about being called out publicly than any genuine remorse. Charles Worthington SR had remained silent through all of this, his face a mask of rigid control. But I could see the cracks forming. His jaw was tight, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that might have looked authoritative if not for the slight tremor visible in his fingers. "Mr. Worthington," I said, turning to face him directly. "You once told me that women don't belong in combat. You said the military was lowering standards to appease politicians. Do you remember that?" His silence was confirmation enough. "I completed the most rigorous training program in the American military. I led men into battle and brought them home alive. I made decisions under fire that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And I did it all while being told, by people like you, that I was biologically incapable of such things." Charles SR finally spoke, his voice rough. "I was wrong." 3 words. They cost him everything to say. I could see that. His pride was his armor, and I had just put a significant dent in it. Yes, I agreed quietly. You were. Bradley had attempted to slip away during the confrontation, trying to blend into the crowd of horrified relatives, but Nakamura's positioning made escape difficult without drawing attention. He stood frozen near the dessert table, his earlier smirk replaced by pale-faced terror. And you, I said, turning to face him. You suggested reporting me for stolen valor. You joked about federal charges. Tell me, Bradley, how does it feel to have accused a Navy Cross recipient of faking her service? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For once, the glib finance executive had nothing to say. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't matter. I addressed the family as a whole. What happened today matters. The years of dismissal and condescension matter. You all had a choice, every day, to treat me with basic human dignity. You chose not to. You chose to mock what you didn't understand, to dismiss what you couldn't verify, to belittle someone who had earned more respect than you could comprehend. I felt Marcus move to my side, his hand finding mine. His presence grounded me, reminded me that not everyone in this family had failed me. I never needed you to believe me, I continued. I know who I am and what I've done. I have medals I keep in a locked box because I didn't earn them for recognition. I earned them because 12 Americans needed to come home, because my team needed a leader who wouldn't quit, because my country asked me to do the impossible and I said yes. Admiral Richardson stood nearby, watching with quiet approval. This was my moment, and he knew it. I hoped that one day you'd accept me as Marcus's wife, I said, my voice softening slightly. I hoped that love would be enough to earn your respect. Instead, you chose cruelty. You chose suspicion. You chose to believe the worst about a woman whose only crime was loving your son and brother. I looked at Priscilla one final time. She was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers. You called me a fraud, Priscilla. You said real sailors don't look like me. But I was being extracted from hostile territory, carrying a wounded teammate, while you were choosing brunch locations. I was making life and death decisions while you were debating the thread count of your sheets. That's not a judgment. That's just reality. We lived different lives, made different choices. The difference is, I never looked down on you for yours. The truth doesn't need defenders when it has witnesses. Now they had all witnessed enough. I turned to Admiral Richardson. Sir, I believe you have somewhere to be. He checked his watch with an exaggerated gesture. The rubber chicken dinner, alas, duty calls. His eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. Commander, it has been an honor, as always. The honor is mine, Admiral. He extended his hand once more, and I shook it firmly. Then, to my surprise, he leaned in slightly and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. I've been waiting 3 years to see those people humbled, he murmured. Worth every minute of the drive. I almost laughed, almost. Tors approached next, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. Good to see you, Viper. Sorry it had to be under these circumstances. Tors, I clasped his hand, feeling the calluses that matched my own. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it. The boys send their regards. Kozlowski said to tell you he still owes you $20 from that poker game. Now I did laugh, a genuine sound that surprised even me. Tell him I'm collecting with interest. Nakamura simply nodded, the quiet acknowledgement of a shared history that needed no words. He had been my communications specialist, my eyes and ears in the darkness. Some bonds transcend language. The Navy personnel began making their way back toward the vehicles. The DoD officer was packing up the projection equipment with practiced efficiency. The show was over, but its effects would ripple through the Worthington family for years to come. Marcus squeezed my hand. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? I had just watched years of suppressed frustration explode in a single evening. I had confronted people who had hurt me and watched them crumble under the weight of their own assumptions. I had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. But vindication, I was learning, didn't feel the way I had expected. There was no triumph, no joy. Only a tired sort of clarity, the recognition that some relationships could never be repaired and perhaps weren't worth repairing in the first place. "I will be," I said finally. "Let's go home." We walked toward the edge of the terrace, leaving the stunned gathering behind us. Admiral Richardson had paused at the bottom of the steps, conferring briefly with his team. When he saw us approaching, he nodded toward the lead SUV. "Commander, we'd be honored to escort you home, unless you'd prefer to stay and enjoy the rest of the party." I glanced back at the Worthington estate one final time. The scattered clusters of relatives were still processing what they had witnessed. Priscilla was being comforted by Margaret, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Charles S.R. stood apart from everyone, staring at the empty screen where footage of his daughter-in-law leading a combat operation had just played. The party that had been in full swing just hours ago had completely dissolved into chaos and confusion. "I think we've made our point, Admiral," I said. "The escort would be appreciated." Before we could reach the vehicles, Charles Worthington S.R. finally moved. He intercepted us at the bottom of the terrace steps, his face a complicated map of emotions I had never seen from him before. Shame, perhaps, regret, the crumbling of certainties he had held his entire life. "Commander Reyes," he said, his voice rough. "Vivian, perhaps we could start over. I was wrong about you, about everything. Women in combat, your service, all of it. I can see that now." I studied him for a long moment. This man who had declared that women didn't belong in combat while I was leading SEALs into battle. This man who had sat at holiday dinners and dismissed my existence with polite condescension. This man who had raised children who felt entitled to publicly humiliate someone they deemed beneath them. "Perhaps you could have been decent people before knowing my rank," I said quietly. "Goodbye, Mr. Worthington." His face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. Marcus and I climbed into the back of the lead SUV, the leather seats cool against my skin. Tors took the passenger seat while a Navy driver navigated us down the long driveway. Through the tinted windows, I watched the Worthington mansion shrink in the distance. The white tents were still standing, the champagne fountain still flowing, but the celebration had ended in ruins. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his hand clasped firmly in mine. I could feel the tension in his grip, the complicated emotions he was processing. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with feeling. "I always knew you were extraordinary." I turned to look at him, this man who had loved me without conditions for 3 years. "You didn't need the footage. You believed me from the very beginning." "Of course I did." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles gently. "You're my wife. I know who you are. I've always known, even without the details. Your family will never forgive themselves." "They shouldn't." His voice hardened with an edge I rarely heard from him. "What Priscilla did today, what they've all done for years, it's inexcusable. I don't care if they're my blood. You're my family now. You're my priority, you always have been." I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the tension slowly drain from my body. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to settle into every muscle. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. It was a good question. The Admiral had mentioned media interest, book deals, documentaries. The story of Operation Silent Tide would be public by morning. My face would be on news channels across the country. The life of quiet anonymity I had maintained so carefully for years was completely over. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I've never been famous before. It wasn't exactly covered in the SEAL training manual." Tors turned in his seat with a slight grin. "Welcome to the club, Viper. Though most of us managed to stay anonymous, you had to go and be exceptional." "Blame the hostages," I replied dryly. "They insisted on being rescued." The banter felt good, familiar. This was the camaraderie I understood, the language of people who had faced death together and walked out the other side. The Worthingtons would never understand it, could never be part of it. That was simply the reality of different worlds colliding. We drove through the Connecticut evening, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. I thought about my parents in San Antonio, who would probably see the news tomorrow morning over their coffee. My mother would cry. My father would pretend not to cry and fail miserably. I should call them, I said suddenly, before they see it on the news. The convoy pulled into a scenic overlook, one of those roadside rest stops with views of rolling hills. I stepped out into the cooling evening air, my phone already in hand. My mother answered on the second ring. Mija, is everything okay? You never call on reunion day. Everything's fine, Mama. Better than fine, actually. I took a deep breath. I need to tell you something before you see it on the news tomorrow. I explained as briefly as I could what had happened. The confrontation with Priscilla, the Admiral's arrival, the declassified footage. By the time I finished, I could hear my mother crying softly on the other end of the line. I always knew, she whispered. I didn't know the details, but I knew my daughter was a hero. I've known since you were 6 years old and you jumped into that creek to save that dog from drowning. You've never been able to walk away from someone who needs help. Mama, those people never deserved you, Vivian. That family with their big house and their expensive wine and their cold hearts. They never saw what we see. They never understood what kind of woman you truly are. I know, I wiped my own eyes, surprised to find them wet. I know, Mama. You come home soon, okay? Your father will want to make his famous brisket. He always makes brisket when he's proud of you. I laughed through my tears. He's going to need a bigger smoker. We said our goodbyes, and I stood for a moment in the fading light, letting the peace of the countryside wash over me. Marcus appeared at my side, wrapping an arm around my shoulders and pulling me close. Everything okay? More than okay. I leaned into his warmth. My mother knew, she always knew, even when I couldn't tell her anything. The people who love you always do. By the time we reached our apartment building in the city, night had fully fallen. The Admiral's convoy departed with crisp salutes and promises to stay in touch. Torres and Nakamura each embraced me before they left, brothers in everything but blood. And then it was just Marcus and me, standing in front of our building as the SUVs disappeared into traffic. Well, Marcus said with a slight smile, that was quite a family reunion. I laughed, the sound echoing off the building facades. Your family certainly knows how to throw a memorable event. I think next year we skip the reunion entirely. Maybe go to Hawaii instead. I like that plan very much. Inside our apartment, everything was exactly as we had left it that morning. My coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Marcus's laptop was open on the dining table. Normal life, waiting patiently for our return. But nothing was normal anymore. Tomorrow, my face would be on every news channel. Tomorrow, the world would know my story. Tonight, though, I was just Vivian. The warrior could rest for a few hours. Marcus pulled me close one final time. I love you, he said simply. Every version of you, the commander and the woman, the hero and the wife, all of it. I love you too. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. Always, he promised. Always. Later, as I lay in bed watching the city lights through our window, I thought about the day's events. The humiliation at the buffet. The revelation on the terrace. The look on Priscilla's face when her accusations crumbled into dust. I had spent years hoping the Worthingtons would accept me without knowing my rank. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my achievements. Perhaps that had been the wrong hope. Perhaps the real test was not whether they would accept me without proof, but whether their acceptance, once granted, would even matter. As the SUV had pulled away from the estate, Marcus had whispered something that stayed with me. I always knew you were extraordinary. And I had watched the mansion shrink in the rearview mirror and replied with the truth that had crystallized in my heart. And now they do too. But I didn't need a Navy Cross to deserve respect. I just needed a family who would have given it freely. The Worthingtons had failed that test. In failing, they revealed everything about their worth as family. I never returned to another Worthington reunion. The next year, Hawaii. The year after our first child was born. Priscilla sent letters for a while. I read the first few before discarding the rest. Some wounds cannot be healed with words. The truth doesn't need defenders when it has witnesses. I didn't have to prove anything anymore.